Here we go. Malaise Era, Part 2. We've talked about the Malaise Era before in Part 1. Defined as the period between 1973 and 1984, the Malaise Era was a result of hard governmental crackdown and vehicle safety and efficiency. This produced rather dull and underpowered cars. If you haven't seen Part 1, I highly recommend pausing now and watching that. Here's it condensed down into 10 seconds. Good? Cool. Let's talk about trucks, SUVs, and maybe even minivans. When the emission crackdown came in 1973, a line was drawn in the sand. Passenger cars, meaning sedans, wagons, and coupes, would have to conform as soon as possible to the new emission regulations and CAFE standards. Trucks, however, were given a grace period to figure things out. At the time, pickup trucks were viewed as farmers' vehicles that could be driven into town for provisions. Essentially, pickup trucks were the least of the government's concern. Because of this, car laws were legislative, meaning Congress chose what MPG requirements were. But for the trucks, they were regulatory laws, meaning experts in the field set out MPG requirements which were more realistic since they had the data to prove it. Trucks were also out of the crosshairs from environmentalists at the time because nearly no one drove them in urban environments. That's like setting anti-shark laws in landlocked Nebraska. Out of sight, out of mind. Here's a great graph that shows the standards as time went on. See how much less restrictive the truck specifications are? This caused a situation similar to what we saw with passenger vehicles. Big block engines became less available in favor of smaller engines. From this policy change came a myriad of effects that we didn't talk about in the first video, mostly focused on trucks and the development of the SUV. Below you'll find chapter markers for each effect, or just sit back and enjoy the full meal that was the Malaise Era. As mentioned before, trucks were given more time than cars to conform to the emission standards. This sparked some ideas with engineers over at Dodge. Because the trucks didn't need emissions equipment like catalytic converters, Dodge developed the Little Red Express. Powered by a 360 cubic inch V8 that was a modified police engine. While it only made about 225 horsepower, because it didn't have a restrictive catalytic converter holding it back, the Little Red Express was the fastest American-made vehicle of 1978, achieving 100 miles an hour before anything else that year. They made 2,188 of them for 1978, but the fun was soon stopped in 1979 when a catalytic converter was required. Although it was short-lived, the idea of the Little Red Express would live on in vehicles like the GMC Cyclone that was built in the late 80s and early 90s, and even in today's vehicles we still see sporty trucks getting around the emission standards like the Ford Raptor R with its 5.2-liter supercharged V8. While torque is a luxury for passenger cars, it's a necessity for trucks. If you want more torque, you need to make the engine bigger, but that was no longer an option for automakers, so they turned to a new idea: diesel engines. Well, I say new, but diesel engines have been around since the late 1800s. designed by Rudolf Diesel. Don't you just love it when the inventor uses their name for the invention? So satisfying. Anyway, diesel engines became a popular choice for use in ships as well as generators due to their ability to run for a long time and produce solid power. It wouldn't be until the 1950s that the idea would make its way into passenger cars. Both Volvo and Mercedes made small batch diesel cars, but Peugeot was the first one to mass produce a diesel car in 1959 with the Peugeot 403. The design still suffered from a lot of noise and harsh vibrations. Those shortcomings helped them stay in obscurity until the late 70s. While experimenting with diesel engines several times throughout history, GM was the first manufacturer to jump on the diesel truck game in 1978 with the 5.7-liter diesel.
Sir! Wrong pumps! Those are for diesels!
This is a diesel.
Announcing the new V8 diesel pickup from Chevrolet.
Wow, hey Norm, 2 batteries, no carburetor.
27 miles per gallon highway, 20 in the city.
Fellas?
A new V8 diesel pickup. Another important innovation offered by Chevrolet.
Norm, we're gonna need another diesel pump.
Chevy trucks. Built to stay.
In the same year, Dodge asked their friends at Mitsubishi if they could use their 4.0-liter inline-6 diesel for the D100 pickup.
Big news for 1978. Diesel power. 243 cubes of 6-cylinder diesel power for regular and 4-wheel drive 150 and 200 series pickups. Available in all states except California.
Both of these diesel engines were unreliable, so they were short-lived, with the Dodge only offering it for a single year and GM dropping it in the early 80s. The real crack in the case was by Ford in 1983, offering the IDI diesel in their F-Series pickups. The IDI was developed by International Harvester. International Harvester started developing their 6.9-liter diesel in the late 1970s. When the second oil crisis hit in 1979, Ford went searching for a suitable diesel engine for their trucks. Sooner or later, Ford called International Harvester, and a deal was struck to use the 6.9-liter in the new line of Ford pickups. While this didn't knock the socks off the pickup truck world, the 6.9-liter was good enough for Ford and International Harvester to continue its investment and development. This led to the 7.3-liter IDI in 1988, which later turned into the 7.3-liter Power Stroke turbo diesel in the 90s that we all know and love. The success of the IDI re-sparked the interest of the other two big automakers, with Dodge re-entering the diesel market in 1989, this time using a Cummins engine, and GM switching to Detroit Diesel for their engines. This proved to be much more reliable, which is why diesel pickups are still offered today, with Ford and Dodge even sticking with their original 1980s connections of Cummins and Power Stroke. GM switched to Isuzu in 1994, who then came together to form Duramax in 1997. Diesel engines would eventually also be cracked down on emissions in the mid-2000s with the addition of DEF requirements, but that's for another day. Another sad, sad day. Okay, we gotta kick it in reverse here for a minute. Small trucks were nothing new in the US. Ford had the Model T truck in the 1910s and followed it with the Model A pickup. These were smaller than the Model AA, which had a 1-ton axle and larger beds. After World War II, we got the first ever compact truck from Crosley, creatively named the Crosley pickup. It was under 48 inches wide, so it could be sold in appliance stores, or at least that's the urban legend. A more truthful reason is that Crosley could pack them side by side on flatbed trucks to cut down on transporting fees. Either way, small trucks were here and very helpful. Now this might be a refresher to those who saw my chicken tax video, but in the 1960s, the US government imposed a tax on light trucks entering the US. It was called the chicken tax because it was actually a larger bill that taxed several imports, one of which was poultry, because post-war Europe was producing a lot of it and driving our prices down. So light trucks suffered a 25% import tax, killing any foreign light trucks from coming here. Once the oil crisis hit, there was a raised demand for small trucks the government waged war on a decade earlier. However, the reward outweighed the risk for companies like Toyota, Datsun, and Mazda. They all came up with ways to get around the tax. Toyota established factories in Southern California. The trucks were assembled mostly in Japan, but not finished and sent to California to have their beds attached and finishing touches made. This meant that they were able to be imported as parts, and since they were finished here, they avoided the 25% tax. It was also great news for the camper community, who could buy trucks and chassis and slap whatever bed they wanted on the back, like these examples here. This would come to an end on May 20th, 1980, as it was declared that the 25% tax would cover half-assembled trucks as well. This came after a long lobby from the big automakers in Detroit, who were pissed off at Toyota's success. We also saw a rise in car-based trucks. For instance, Dodge introduced the Rampage in 1982, Subaru introduced the Brat in 1978, and the Volkswagen pickup existed for a while, whatever. All of these joined the ranks of the already popular Chevy El Camino and Ford Ranchero, but unlike those brutes of Americana, these new vehicles had 4-cylinder engines and could actually drive 10 miles without having to refuel. While they gained popularity throughout the 1980s, they were extinct by the 1990s. Nearly as fast as they had been conceived, they folded. The Rampage had the shortest run, which was 1982 to 1984. Ford and GM raced like hell to put out their small trucks. The Ranger and the S10 came to market in the 1980s, following the path that Toyota, Datsun, and Mazda had laid down. Now, Ford built the Courier in the past, and Chevy had done the Love, but they were woefully outdated. So the bigwigs pooled a bunch of money towards the small trucks. But once they did so, they wanted to use their all-new platforms for something else, to capitalize on all the money that they had spent developing them. So, we got vehicles like the Chevy Blazer and the Ford Bronco 2, riding on those shiny new platforms.
Now it's time for your best quality Ford dealers model year-end closeout. This could be your last chance to get a great deal on the 1988 Ford Bronco 2. For a limited time, buy a Bronco 2 and you'll get a $750 cash bonus. Combine your bonus with a special option package and you could save over $2,600. Now is the time to buy a Bronco 2 during your best quality Ford dealers model year-end closeout.
There's a good reason why Chevy S10 Blazer 4x4 was designed to shift into four-wheel drive at any speed, and why S10 Blazer has electronic fuel injection to perform at any altitude. It's called Colorado.
The story goes that some AMC engineers hiked into the woods of Milford, Michigan with binoculars and spied the upcoming Blazer from a hill overlooking the GM proving grounds. This led them to design the Jeep Cherokee.
Jeep Cherokee's advantages, and certain things stand out. Cherokee gives you a choice of 2 or 4 doors, 2 shift-on-the-fly four-wheel drive systems, and an optional 4-liter 6-cylinder engine that's more powerful, far more powerful, than anything in its class. All of this is precisely why 4-Wheel and Off-Road magazine named Jeep Cherokee 4x4 of the Year for the second time.
Similarly, Chrysler developed their own light truck for civilian use. It got around the fuel economy standards for passenger cars. We now refer to it as a minivan. That's right, one of the requirements to be considered as a light truck is a flat floor starting behind the front seats and going to the back of the vehicle. While the law was written in the way to accompany the very low number of work vans sold in the 70s, Chrysler saw no reason they couldn't add some seats and make it a family vehicle. They debuted the Dodge Caravan in 1983 for the 1984 model year, and history was changed forever.
You've never seen anything like it, because there's never been anything like it.
Dodge, an American revolution.
Introducing our new front-wheel drive Dodge Caravan. Great mileage and shorter than a full-size station wagon. Yet there's available seating for 2, 5, even 7 adults, or 125 cubic feet of cargo. Dodge Caravan. Even its standard protection plan makes it a transportation revolution.
We are Dodge, an American revolution.
It was technically a light truck, so it didn't have to meet the MPG standards of cars, yet they were easy to drive and easy to love. This simple fact was fought by the UAW, or United Auto Workers Union, but President Reagan wanted fewer government interactions on business, so he sided with Chrysler on the ruling and went to lunch. Jeeps were oddities at the time. Were they trucks or were they cars? Who knows? Jeep had been freshly acquired by the ailing Kaiser Company and was now a part of AMC. Under Kaiser's control, Jeeps were sold out of small, rural outlets that closely resembled mom-and-pop shops. When the oil crisis hit and the crackdowns came, Stephen Girard, who worked at Kaiser Jeep, was hunting buddies with Roy Chapin, who was an executive at AMC. Chapin would go on to lead the charge, changing the tide for what a Jeep would be categorized as, telling them that the Jeeps were more like light trucks. It took tons of lobbying from Jeep, especially their CEO in the late 70s, but it worked. This, along with AMC's investment into Jeeps as a lifestyle brand, would make Jeep sales nearly quadruple in the 1970s, cementing them in history where only a decade before, Ford and GM had passed on the opportunity to purchase them. This set the tone for SUVs moving forward. Since Jeep's big argument was that they were built off of truck platforms, it should follow the truck rules, and other automakers clung to that argument as well. In 1977, the Transportation Department updated their rules, solidifying SUVs as trucks. This triggered automakers into making some interesting vehicles. Vehicles like this. This is a 1986 Dodge Ram Charger, and as you can see, it looks just like it would be a pickup truck, but it has a nice interior. Look at this, and on here we have this nice pattern, nice grab handles, power windows, things like that, and most importantly, we have a back seat. This was a very, very early version of the SUVs that we would later start to get, built off of a truck platform, so it had to only comply to truck fuel regulations and not passenger. However, it actually had a nice interior. Now, this meant that the manufacturer had to vouch that the vehicle was capable of, quote, off-highway operation, but you could see how those arguments were easily made. That's why we have so many SUVs here today, because they don't have to conform to as strict of emissions laws, because Jeep petitioned for it back in the 1970s. The malaise era is still alive and well, ladies and gentlemen. When the laws started cracking down on light trucks, distinctions had to be made between a light truck and a truck. The easiest way to do so was gross vehicle weight. Gross vehicle weight is the maximum weight of the vehicle fully loaded. So if the car is 3,000 pounds and can carry 1,000 pounds inside of it, its gross vehicle weight is 4,000 pounds. The bar was set at 6,000 pounds. Anything over that was considered a full-size truck and out of reach by the government's fuel economy regulations. When the law went into effect in the early 1970s, 2/3 of trucks on sale were under the 6,000 pound line. But by 1977, only 1/3 of the trucks were under that line. How is that possible? Were they adding lead to these trucks to make them heavier? No. Manufacturers started beefing up the suspension of trucks so that they could, theoretically, carry more weight. This in turn raised the gross vehicle weight up above the 6,000 pound mark, getting them out of danger of the regulation. Once Jimmy Carter took office, the limit was raised to 8,500 pounds after GM assured the government that no passenger vehicle would pass that. This was, of course, a lie. The weight has never been raised past 8,500 pounds, leading to vehicles like the Hummer H2, which just so happens to have a gross vehicle weight of 8,600 pounds. Yeah. What was the punishment for not complying to all of these fuel standards? Well, a few things, but one that sticks out and is still around is the gas guzzler tax. If your vehicle falls 5 miles per gallon under the set number, the vehicle is slapped with a gas guzzler tax, adding to the price of the car. This gives automakers an incentive to aim for good MPG to keep the car's price competitive and low, but in some instances, the automaker just doesn't care. The Dodge Challenger Hellcat was slapped with the gas guzzler tax, but for a performance car, their customer base wears that tax as a badge of honor. For nothing, $7,000 after a 38% APR, zero money down financing is nearly $10,000 added to the price. Protect your credit, boys and girls. The Malaise era had a profound impact on trucks, SUVs, and even the development of minivans, shaping the vehicles and automotive culture that we know today. From the creative loopholes and innovations like the Little Red Express, to the rise of diesel engines and shift towards SUVs, manufacturers navigated restrictive policies by adapting designs and technologies. The legacy of the Malaise era lives on, not just in nostalgia, but in the continued popularity of trucks, diesel engines, and SUVs. I hope you guys enjoyed this next installment of the Malaise era. I'm sure there will be many more, as this appears to be one of the most fascinating eras of vehicles that I love. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you guys so much for loving the first episode. You guys have gotten it over 300,000 views, and I cannot thank you enough from the bottom of my heart. I really love doing these videos, and you guys put a smile on my face every day. Here's to the next one, and here's to the Malaise era. Take care, everyone.